All right, welcome into Bracket Buster Breakdown. The bracket has just been released, well, a few hours ago, had a few hours to digest, and, well, we'll get into it. How about right now? And I can get into my rant as you look at this bracket, which is something. I think this is possibly one of the worst brackets we have seen in a long time, if ever. The seating is very much whacked out. I don't know truly much what we're doing here. Metrics and all that stuff, you can factor it in if you want. You can, you can't, whatever you want to do. There are some teams here that are very much overseeded. There are some teams here that I think are a bit underseeded. There's teams I don't think should be here that are here, and shows that this committee finishes this bracket on Thursday and truly just says, hey, this is the bracket we're going with. Friday, Saturday, Sunday truly doesn't matter. We can, shift things around to make it look like they matter, but in all reality, it does not matter because they finish on Thursday and they don't factor in like half of these conference tournaments. I've always thought, maybe we should have all the conference tournaments maybe end on Saturday. So on Sunday, the committee can just think about it and go on from there. And then we get a bracket at 6 o'clock like usual. You can factor in the whole week and you're simple there. That is not possible when you have the last conference tournament wrapping up 10 minutes before the brackets are released. I've always thought Sunday didn't matter just because of that reason. I think they've shown that multiple times, especially with the Big Ten. There are results that should affect how the tournament ends up seeding out, and the committee just doesn't care. And they've shown the past few years they don't care about basically this whole week when the actual power conferences are playing and all that seeding's happening. It's disgusting. I mean, I did mention the metrics and stuff. One of them, I love the KenPom. I feel like KenPom really just gets down to the nitty gritty, what's good, what's bad, all that good stuff. Now, I do think KenPom at sometimes can be a little bit fraudulent, boost up some rankings, even though the teams aren't that good, aka right now, I'm looking at the KenPom, and we have, BYU at 16. It's not awful, but it's not great. Michigan State at 19. They should not be or 18, I should say. They should not be at 18 in the KenPom. You've got a Colorado at 26. But it kind of gives you an idea. It's a bit of a mix with the KenPom. One of the big ones here is... I don't know if the committee just doesn't factor it in. They factor in their fraudulent net rankings, which the net rankings just shouldn't be real. I don't know why they're using their own ratings and then not listening to them at all, basically, because that's clearly what they do. But let's take a look at one of these really quick. Duquesne, they're the 11th seed in the East. They won the A10 today, so they were a bid stealer. It was always going to be this way. They were going to steal the bid. They were going to be seated somewhere. Duquesne currently ranks 86th in KenPom, and they are an 11 seed. Now let's take a look at another 11 seed. It's a team that won their conference. That was New Mexico, the Lobos. New Mexico currently ranks 23rd in KenPom. So you're telling me that Duquesne and New Mexico are on the same level, but when they're in the KenPom, they are very much spaced out. This committee, I think this was a very fraudulent year for them. Some of these were just absolutely disgusting what they've done, but it's going to be a true test for the people that watch the sport all year and just don't fill out a bracket, when the bracket comes out and they're just like picking names because they like them. The people that have actually watched this sport this year and watched these teams play, it's going to be a difficult fill out of this bracket this year because I think the committee didn't know what they were doing, honestly. It does not look like they knew what they were doing. Why you might be asking, why does the committee, think like this? Let's take a look at the bracket. We'll go more in depth here. So let's get into this. We're going to start off in the East region. The number 1 overall seed, UConn Huskies. They won the Big East, which shows the committee just moved things around because the other 1 seeds did not win their conference tournament, and UConn just kind of got the 1 seed because they were the only one standing, basically. So they can move those kind of things around. It's the actual matchups. One of them being the potential opponent for UConn in the second round, and that is the other Friday matchup between Florida Atlantic and Northwestern. Florida Atlantic should be absolutely nowhere near this tournament. They are here because of what they did last year in that they were a preseason top 10. They have, I believe it was 2 or 3 quad 4 losses, which not great. They currently sit 41 in Ken Palm. So if you're just taking the top, 36 from Ken Palm as your at-larges, I know there's a lot of mixing in there because teams win the conference tournament, but they probably fall outside of it. This team, they've lost to Bryant at home. They've lost to Florida Gulf Coast on the road. They lost to Charlotte, who is a 119 in Ken Palm. They lost to UAB, who ended up winning the American, so that's not as bad of a loss. But the most indicting one, to me, is their loss on Saturday in the American semifinals. They lost to Temple, who currently sit 182 in the Ken Palm. Temple finished this year 16-20. You lost to them in the semifinals, and what you get rewarded with is an 8 seed. Absolutely disgusting. This team should have been a 10. They should have been in the play-in. They actually should have just been out of the tournament. This resume isn't good. They're hanging on their 1 win against Arizona in double overtime at a neutral site. That's what you're hanging on to keep this team in the tournament. I don't get the rationale between with having Florida Atlantic this high in the bracket as an 8 seed. Just absolutely mind-boggling. You get Northwestern as a 9. Kind of felt like they were more on the bubble, especially with the way things played out this weekend. It didn't end up that way. San Diego State, they lost in the semifinals, I believe it was, of the Mountain West. So 5 seed. It's not great, but it's not awful there. UAB, I think, should have been a little bit higher. With their run in the American, obviously winning the conference, I think they were higher than a 12 seed. I think that's a team you fit into that 11-10 range, but obviously the committee didn't do that because they've proven this weekend doesn't matter. Auburn, Yale, I feel like both teams kind of expected where they are. Auburn, I think, could have been higher. When they came out with the actual rankings of, the seed rankings of 1 to 68, Auburn, I believe, was the lowest or second lowest. They were the second lowest 4 seed, which tells me this committee doesn't know what they're doing. They aren't watching the basketball because Auburn is not the second lowest 4 seed. They are probably a more high 3rd seed. Another thing, just in this section of the East Regional alone, we have 3 of the teams from the Final Four last year. How you make that happen is beyond me, but whatever. Let's move on to the second half of this East region. You have BYU. Mentioned them a little bit earlier. I think a 6 seed is pretty fair for them. Duquesne. I don't get the Duquesne. I don't think they've had, a great season. Like I said, in the Ken Palm, they sit 86. If you just look at their non-conference losses, it's not awful, but it's not great. They lost to Princeton, they lost to Nebraska, and they lost to Santa Clara in the non-conference. Their non-conference wins against teams that are above 100 in KenPom, which, I mean, that's still a large number. It's Charleston, who were at 98, UC Irvine at 76, and Bradley at 64. That's not great to me. They started out 0-5 in conference, which isn't great, but then they only lost 3 more games the rest of the conference season, so this team did kind of turn it around, but it just feels like they're playing hot right now, and I do honestly think they are an 11 seed. Illinois, they win the Big Ten. They end up being a 3 seed, which, again, that's a choice, but whatever. It probably would have ended up playing out that they would be a 3 seed anyways, so I think that's pretty fair. Morehead State, 14 seed. You got to fill in those spots somehow, and I think Morehead is kind of the best of those, non-power conference teams, these mid-majors. Then you get to Washington State, Drake. Drake, I feel they're 10 seed. I feel like they could have been a 9 or an 8, and if you're putting them basically right with Duquesne, who's at 11, doesn't make sense to me, but here we are again. And then you have Iowa State. Iowa State, I thought, was making a very good case to be that 4th number 1 seed. I thought that with their win against Houston in the dominating fashion they did it, they had a real good case for it coming out of Saturday. But what does the committee give them? They give them the 2 seed in the East, with the number 1 overall seed, UConn. And in return of that, Iowa State is the lowest ranked 2 seed. Don't ask me how that happened, because Iowa State was playing very, very good basketball this past week, and yet here we are, and they are the worst 2 seed, basically. Don't get it, but whatever. Also, if you kind of haven't got the point, I'm just kind of going through my overall reactions of this bracket right now. Full predictions will be coming probably Tuesday, maybe Monday. We'll see. But just trying to get some thoughts out right now. Moving on to the South region, Houston, a deserved number 1 seed. I don't think there's any complaints about that. Longwood, they're 16. Again, I don't think there's a ton of complaints there. I think maybe you sneak them, to a 15 maybe. I know, St. Peter's finished 19-13. I think there could have been an argument there that they could have flipped there. Long would be a 15. You could do the same for Long Beach State, who obviously we'll see both of those later. They're both 15 seeds. I think there's an argument to be made that Longwood could have been a 15 seed, but obviously that didn't work out that way. Nebraska, Texas A&M. I don't think Texas A&M should have been in the tournament, but they are. Nebraska. It's going to be tough to watch this team because they've been really good at home, but on the road, it kind of falls apart on the road. So with all these games obviously being at neutral sites, that does worry me a tad with Nebraska. Wisconsin, they were in the Big Ten title game. They get rewarded with a 5 seed, and they're going up against James Madison, who's a 12 seed. Again, another seeding that makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. This team is 31-3. They beat Michigan State to start the season. I know Michigan State, wasn't good at all this year, but they currently have the nation's longest winning streak. 2 of their losses was to Appalachian State. They actually didn't avenge that in their title game because they lost to Arkansas State. Appalachian State did. Their other loss was to Southern Miss, which Southern Miss isn't a good loss at all. So, that could have played a factor in. But I don't get how James Madison is a 12 and Duquesne is an 11. I don't see the rationale there. There's no truly explanation for that one. Then you get Duke, Vermont. Vermont always seems overseeded because they just never show up in March. But this Duke team also doesn't look that great. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't show up in March either. So this kind of truly is a battle of who's actually going to show up for once. So that should be an interesting day in Brooklyn. We'll move on to the bottom half of this South region. You have Texas Tech going up against NC State, who won 5 games in 5 days in the ACC, winning the ACC title for the first time since the 1980s. I don't think you could have put NC State any lower than 11. It felt like that was just a good landing spot for them, given that they were a bid stealer, but they're not bad enough to be a 12 or a 13. Then you have Kentucky going up against Oakland. Oakland, the winner of the Horizon League, going up against a Kentucky team that just came out flat in the SEC tournament. The question is, does that carry over? Or does the Kentucky we've seen the past few weeks that just are absolutely dominant show up? That's something to watch for that one. And then you get to the last 2 games of this region, technically 3. You get a Florida team who lost in the SEC title today. They've kind of been hot as of late. They will be going up the winner against Boise State, Colorado. Boise State, once again, I think the committee is showing that they kind of didn't pay attention this year. Boise State's not a 10 seed, and they sure aren't a play-in game team. Colorado, I would agree with. They kind of are in a play-in situation. They were in the Big 12 or Pac-12 title, I should say, last night. I thought that should have been whoever wins that game is in, the loser is out. But instead, we have Colorado in this tournament for some reason. And they're going up against a Boise State team that probably shouldn't be in Dayton, but they are anyways. Now we get down to Marquette. They'll be facing off against Western Kentucky. Obviously, the biggest question there is Tyler Kolek's health. Who knows with that? They're being so secretive at Marquette. I mean, this whole Big East tournament, it was basically just announced like hours before that he wasn't playing. So really anything could happen there. Let's move on to the Midwest region, which this region is just, I don't know. Purdue, the number 1 seed there, they will be taking on the winner of Montana State, Grambling State. I don't think there's truly any argument from me about that 16 seed playing game. Both teams kind of fit that billing. Then you get Utah State, who are an 8 seed. I didn't think that's a spot they should have been. I think they fit more around a high 7, mid 6 range. I did not think that they would be an 8 seed, and I did not think TCU would make this tournament. They sit here as a 9 seed. It shows that they clearly weren't really in any major trouble as they wait for their game on Friday in Indianapolis. Then you get down to Gonzaga, somehow a 5 seed. This team basically was out of the tournament until they beat Kentucky in mid-February. And then they lost it's not even like they had good wins. They lost to St. Mary's twice. They lost to St. Mary's twice in the season. They won one of the games, but I don't have any good explanation on why Gonzaga is a 5 seed. They haven't played like one all this season, but they're going to be one anyways. They're going up against McNeese Cowboys, led by Will Wade. They have had a very good season. They've had some good wins. Question is, can they obviously keep it rolling in tournament time? And then you get another very interesting, 4-13 game. It is Kansas with all the injuries that they have. They're coming off that loss in the second round of the Big 12 tournament, going up against Samford, who out of the SoCon, who are a very dangerous team. If they can play the right way, they can get shots to go down. It could get really interesting because we don't know the health that, Kansas is going to be at. And this seems like a very trap-ish situation for the Jayhawks. We move down to the second half of this Midwest bracket. You have a South Carolina team kind of were exposed by Auburn in the SEC tournament. They're going up against Oregon, who won the Pac-12. We kind of mentioned them a little bit earlier. They faced off against Colorado last night in that Pac-12 title game. Again, no, I thought it should have been whoever won that game is an 11 seed. The other team's out. Obviously, that did not happen. But Oregon, they seem to be getting healthier as the games go on. It might be a potential situation for Oregon here to advance here. Dana Altman never lost a game in the first round as Oregon head coach, so that's something to watch there. And then you get a Creighton team who I think have been set up really well here, going up against Akron. Akron has never won an NCAA tournament game. Obviously, that could change this year, but it really did take a miracle for them to even get to the tournament by winning the MAC. Then we get down to the last sectional of this regional. You have Texas. They will be facing off against another winner in Dayton, and that is Virginia, Colorado State. That game is, I believe, Tuesday, I should say. The fact that Virginia is in this tournament is absolutely disgusting. They are in it because of the name, not because of the way they have played this year, because if anybody with eyes saw Virginia this year, they would say that is not a tournament team. Yet here they are. They're going up against Colorado State team, which honestly probably shouldn't be here either. I think the Mountain West is very overrated. They ended up with 6 total teams in this tournament, one of them including Colorado State, who were the last team in. I don't think they should be here, but here they are. We get a game between these two. Both of them I don't believe should be here, and they get the right to play Texas. Then we get down to the 2 seed in this Midwest region, and it is Tennessee. They will be going up against St. Peter's. Of course, St. Peter's, that miracle run to the Elite Eight 2 years ago. It was 2022 season. They go up against Rick Barnes in Tennessee, who, if Dalton Knecht is not on his game, that could get a little scary for Tennessee. Obviously, Rick Barnes has had trouble in this tournament these past few years, so I'm really not ruling anything out there. We finally move on to the last region, is the West region. The question was, who is going to be the 1 seed here? It ends up being North Carolina, which I don't think there really is any true disagreement there. Even though they lost the ACC title, it still kind of felt like they controlled their own destiny, and they end up with that 1 seed. I think the best argument for a team to replace them should have been Iowa State, I should say. But obviously the committee didn't see it that way, and they get to play the winner of the Howard Wagner game. I kind of agree with those 2 16s being in Dayton. Both of them not outstanding metrics this year. Wagner was down to 7 players at one point this season due to injuries. They have not had the greatest of runs this year. The 8-9 game is another 2 teams that honestly, they should not be these seeds. They should either be much lower or out. That is Mississippi State, Michigan State. Both teams just kind of had awful years. And I don't really justify the committee giving them the 8 and 9 seed. It really kind of does say that the committee just didn't care this week and didn't really look at the resumes, I think, for either team, because neither team really has any good wins, honestly. I know Michigan State beat Illinois at home. They beat Baylor in a semi-neutral site in Detroit. I don't think that – I know the metrics love them. The metrics are just in love with Michigan State, which I don't get. Metrics are not so – they like Mississippi State. They don't love them. But, I mean, just looking at it, they have the win against Auburn, but that's really it. They had a win against Tennessee in the tournament. I again, I don't think the committee really took that into effect. But I don't know. I don't get this. Moving on, you get the 5-12 game, and it is St. Mary's, another team very much overseeded, I think. This St. Mary's team is like a 7 seed this year, and they are the exact same seed as Gonzaga, a team that they've beaten twice. So I don't get it. I really don't know what the committee was thinking with these seeds this year. Just some of them are way out there, including the St. Mary's. They get to play Grand Canyon. I think that's going to be a tough test for them. But Grand Canyon always seems to choke in the tournament, so I wouldn't really expect much from them there. We move on, and it is the 4 seed Alabama going up against Charleston. I think this is actually one of like the matchups that kind of feels like the committee got right here, seeding wise. That one of very few. I don't know. It's something. Yeah, it sure is something. And we move on to the final section of this bracket. And we start off with Clemson, New Mexico. We already talked about New Mexico. I don't get why there's a 11 seed. That kind of shows they weren't going to be in if they didn't win, which is kind of an indictment on the committee with the way they played this year. But this Clemson team, I overseeded a lot. That this Clemson team's a 9 seed at best. They haven't been that good this year. Baylor, Colgate, another one. Colgate always seems to be the 14 seed every single year. Baylor kind of felt like they were on that borderline 3-2. They probably make it if they win the Big 12. They probably make it to a 2, but they obviously didn't. So we end up here. And then finally, we have Arizona going up against Long Beach State. Long Beach State probably should have been a 16 seed. They fired their coach on Monday, but let him coach the rest of the season because they thought it would be a one and done for obviously the tournament, the Big 12 or Big West tournament, I should say. But he leads them to the NCAA tournament. So I can't really, I don't get it. It's something. It sure is something. That is the bracket. Like I said, predictions are going to come soon-ish, probably tomorrow, maybe Tuesday. I kind of just want to get some initial thoughts out there because honestly, this is just such a disgusting bracket. There's so much going on that just doesn't make sense. But here we are. We are here, and yeah, I don't get this bracket. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Bracket Buster Breakdown. We're going to find those bracket busters for you in these predictions. They're going to be somewhere. I truly don't know where, but they're going to be somewhere. Thank you so much for watching. If you just stumbled across this video, click like, click subscribe, tell anybody you know about it. We'll see you back soon for a official prediction video. We'll take a look at the women's tournament. I think there's a lot more intrigue matchup-wise there than there is with this tournament. It should be a very interesting time to be a college basketball fan. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon for another episode of Bracket Buster Breakdown.